We feel it is important to continue to stay connected to Alcoholics Anonymous and to fellowship with each other. Please feel free to use the chat section on Zoom to get each other's contact information so we can all stay connected. We'll be hosting a 1-hour speaker meeting Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. on Zoom with the same meeting ID you have used for this one. We are fully supporting declining outside contributions, and in keeping with the 7th tradition, we will send around the Venmo basket if you wish to contribute. The Venmo basket information is posted in the chat section for the remainder of the meeting. It is at Elm City Speaker Group -meeting. And for those who will join me, I will say the set-aside prayer. Dear God, please help me set aside everything I think I know about myself, my disease, the Big Book, and the 12 Steps. Everything I think I know about the program, the fellowship, all spiritual terms, and especially about you, God, so I may have an open mind and a new experience. Please help me see the truth. Amen. From the foreword to the first edition of Alcoholics Anonymous. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book and of this group. Our group's message comes out of "There is a solution" from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. We have a way out on which we can absolutely agree and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. This is the great news this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. Please continue to join us each Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Zoom until we are able to all meet again in person. The meeting ID is the same one you used to get in tonight. Now, I would like to introduce tonight's speaker, Wayne B. from California. And you can unmute yourself whenever you're ready, pal.
Thought there was going to be a reading. I'm Wayne, I'm an alcoholic. It's good to be here, grateful to be sober. I love AA. I want to thank Paul for asking me to come share this afternoon, tonight, for you folks. It's always a pleasure and a privilege for me to be asked to participate in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not one of those people that say I don't enjoy this. I actually do. I mean, I like to see the faces. I'll flip through the channels here to watch people, to see who's judging me so I can judge them back. And then the other ones I'll smile at. So, you know, that's where that goes. I want to thank my sponsor for coming to the meeting tonight. And I also want to thank my posse for coming along to support me. And if there's anybody new in this meeting, I'm going to ask you to do yourself a favor. I'm going to say, please don't judge AA according to my presentation. There might be something about me that disturbs you or that you don't like. And if that's the case, you might judge AA by mistake instead of me. So feel free to judge me. I'm sure worthy of it. But don't misjudge AA, because for whatever you don't understand about AA, it takes time, daily effort and time for some of this understanding to sink in. But I'll guarantee you it will if you get involved, plant yourself in the middle of AA and just do what we did and what we still do. And I believe you can recover too. At least that's my story. I want to start out just by saying what makes me alcoholic. I want to get that out of the way right away before you get lost in my story. You know, sometimes people hear my story and they nickname me Insane Wayne and Crazy Wayne, and they begin to think that maybe it's not about alcoholism in my case because of the story that I have. But I want to put right out front there that I'm definitely an alcoholic. And I've taken the Johns Hopkins 20 questions test. Anybody else who all has taken the 20 questions test, Johns Hopkins? I love that test because you can cheat. I mean, they actually put the quantification of the questions at the bottom of the card. In other words, if you go to I like to read the back of a book to see the ending. And if I like the ending, I'll read the rest of the book. That's just the way my mind works. So I went right to the bottom of the 20 questions, and here's the quantification. It says if you answer yes to one question, you might be alcoholic. If you answer yes to two, you're probably alcoholic. If you answer yes to three or more, you're definitely alcoholic. Now, in my mind, I already know I'm not going to give them three. There's no way. I don't care what's on this test. They're not going to get three. My query is do I give them one or two? If I give them one, they may think I'm lying. If I gave them two, they may nudge me towards three. So it was really a perplexing test for me. It can give you an alcoholic of my type of headache. But I really like what's on page 44. I was taken to this page often. I'm still taken to it to remind myself what makes me alcoholic. And I'm going to put this in the first person. I hope you don't mind. It says, if, when I honestly want to. Now, of course, this book is predicated on alcohol, or a problem with alcohol, alcoholism. And so I'll tell you why I said that. If, when I honestly want to, I find I cannot quit entirely, it doesn't say alcohol, and there's a lot of people inserting a lot of non-alcohol words in there because it's blank. But to the reader, it has to be assumed they're talking about quit drinking. So was I unable to quit drinking when I honestly want to? And you know what? I can lie to you, I can lie to the doctor, I can lie to the therapist, but I couldn't lie to myself about it. I knew that if I ever wanted to, I wouldn't be able to quit entirely. So there's one yes. Or if when drinking, I have little control over the amount I take. You know what? I'd like to lie about that one too, but I've had so many blackouts, I'm not sure if you have a blackout, you can't really remember. But there were times where I didn't mean to get drunk, did not start out to overdrink, and I found myself struck drunk time after time after time. Even though I'm a periodic alcoholic, which means I don't drink every day, I never have. I'm not a morning drinker. I've never had a morning drink. I've never drank 5 days in a row. I have blacked out for 5 days, but I've not drank for 5 or more days in a row straight. I mean, being drunk. And so it says I'm probably alcoholic. I love that probably, because when I read this, I'm going to zip through it. If when I honestly want to, I find I cannot quit drinking entirely, or if when drinking I have a little control over the amount I take, I'm probably alcoholic. That was close. It says probably, see? It ain't like that other test that says I'm definitely. It says I'm probably. And I want you to know something. I almost died probably an alcoholic. And I think in my years of experience that most of us die between probably and definitely. And I don't know exactly what day it was I definitely became an alcoholic, but I rode that probably for quite some time. But somewhere between steps 1 and 12, and being in a meeting like this, listening to alcoholics talk about their inability to control and enjoy their drinking, their inability to quit entirely when they really wanted to, hearing that over in story form. And I'm glad they talked about alcohol, or you would have lost me. And they, over and over again, they told their stories. And I guess that sank into me. And eventually, while taking a 12, I raised my hand and said, I'm an alcoholic. But it didn't go any further than my hand. I raised my hand, but I wasn't convinced I'm an alcoholic when I first came to AA. Maybe, whatever you want to say, but I was psychiatric when I got here. I was suffering from multiple mental illness diagnoses. My first one being at 9 years of age, all the way up to 27. I had 18, and then 7 years sober, I had 3 more diagnoses psychiatrically. So by the time I got to you and stayed with you for a while, I was absolutely convinced I was psychiatric. Hence the nickname Insane Wayne and Crazy Wayne. But the truth of it, and I believed it. And I took the medication, and when it said don't drink on it, of course I drank on it. If they say don't drink on it, I wonder why. And so nothing was effective. Nothing was solving what I come to find out. The second part of being alcoholic is alcoholism. There's a difference between being alcoholic and having the spiritual malady of alcoholism, and I didn't know that. Of course, this is just my opinion based on my experience. Feel free to disagree. Absolutely. But this is my belief system. I didn't know there was such a thing as alcoholism. My brother's an alcoholic. My brother's been sober 40 years, one day at a time. He goes to one meeting a week, whether he needs it or not, and he sponsors the same 2 guys that he sponsored for the last 39 years. And he's as happy as he can be. He's not miserable. After that first year of getting sober, when he was kind of miserable, and he took the steps, he was a lot like Dr. Bob. After Dr. Bob got past that first year, even though the craving for alcohol didn't leave him for 5 years, his mind and his emotions smoothed right out. And from that day to the day Dr. Bob died, his emotions were natural and intact. And that's my brother. He's just like that. And I don't understand that. He doesn't have to do anything special to have a normal mind and emotion. It's just that he's got it. And then there's me. Bill addressed the New York State Medical Society in 1944. This is an interesting anecdote, but it probably helped save my life. I was wondering, since Bill's not a doctor, why the AMA invited him to New York to answer questions. Why wouldn't they invite Dr. Bob? He's a doctor. So that got me curious, and so I looked into that. Come to find out, they wanted to ask Bill some pertinent questions. So one of the questions they asked Bill was, of your fellowship and a handful of men and a handful of women, how would you describe their personality makeups to be? And he didn't hesitate. He said, well, half would be normal in every regard. Able, intelligent, friendly people, except for the effect alcohol has on them. That's my brother. And then he says, the other half would be more or less pronounced neurotic. And that's my school. That's my club in AA. More or less pronounced neurotic. I didn't know none of that stuff. So let me go back to where it started, just briefly. You know, I've got to start my clock. Okay, there we go. No, I was raised in an alcoholic home. The reason, first of all, the reason I wanted to say what makes me alcoholic is because I don't want the newcomer to get lost in my story and not understand it. What makes me alcoholic is that simple 2 sentences. The inability to control and enjoy my drinking, and when I want to, I can't quit entirely. That's what makes me alcoholic. Dr. Silkworth calls that the allergy and the obsession, the phenomenon of craving, where alcohol is concerned. And I like how you started out, Leslie, by you introduced yourself as a recovered alcoholic. And I know what that means now. The book says that we have recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body where alcohol is concerned. That's not written like that, but it is in the 12 and 12, where alcohol is concerned. So my sobriety date is November 8th, 1977. I haven't had a drink, no pills, powders, posters, or lotions that alter my emotions from that day to this. So that's interesting. So I have come to believe that if there is such a thing as the disease of alcoholism, it was arrested the day I stopped drinking. And not knowing that almost killed me because I became a victim of the disease. I thought, you know, by the time I got around to this understanding, my disease was thinking for me. My disease was telling me to do this. My disease was telling me to do that. My disease, I found a new thing to blame, the disease. I became a victim of the verbosity floating around meetings. I've come to believe that the phenomenon of craving and the allergy, that was arrested on November 8th, 1977. And what I'm dealing with now has nothing to do with that unless I don't deal with it. And that's the spiritual malady. Speaking for myself, of course, the spiritual malady. I didn't know that. How many people do you know that have cancer are required to have a 12-step way of life or have a spiritual awakening? People with diabetes, tuberculosis, leukemia. They don't need a program like this that doesn't require that. So I was kind of baffled by that, if you want to know the truth. But here's my counter influences. I'm raised in an alcoholic home. I know many of you weren't. I was raised in an alcoholic home. My father, 6'4", tough guy. He was a tough guy. I'm living proof he was a tough guy. You know, he'd fight at the drop of a hat. He'd shoot you, he'd stab you. My dad he wanted me to be a tough guy like him. My brother is a tough guy like my dad. To this day, he just doesn't hurt people no more. My sister's a tough guy. And then there's me. I wrote poetry. And that made my father insane. How can you be a tough guy if you write poetry? I remember, I didn't know what a poem was, by the way. I've been given a gift. And part of that gift is the gift of word usage. And I was able to put words on paper that I now know one of the first things I wrote was called a sonnet. But I didn't know that till after I got sober and found out that's what it's called. I didn't know that, but I found out that that's a gift, and I have that gift. And my dad found one of the things I wrote, and he almost beat me to death that night, and he said, I ain't going to have no faggots living in my house, quote unquote. And I never wrote again till I got to AA. He snatched that voice right out of me. I'm not blaming, I'm reporting, by the way. There's no victimization here. It's just that's the way it was. My father was a truck driver out of Chicago, Illinois. He worked for a guy named Jimmy Hoffa. And my dad believed in his job, and he brought his work home. Some of you know that name, so you understand. And that didn't make me alcoholic, but it sure put a definite spin on my personality, is what took place in that house on a regular basis. And I was an odd kid. You know, they called me peculiar. I was peculiar, abnormal, like something's wrong with me, and I just don't know what's wrong with me. And, you know, Wilson wrote that any kid that grows up in an alcoholic home is bound to be somewhat neurotic. And in my case, it was on the more side. And I'm doing this weird stuff. I'm peculiar, and they're starting to send me to see counselors at school. And I get my first psychologist at the age of 9. Bear with me. Doesn't sound like alcoholism, but it is almost. I haven't drank yet. Right now, I'm getting predisposed for Al-Anon, if you know what I mean. And I'm acting out. They call it acting out now. And what I was doing was biting people in school, chasing them, eating crayons. I'd sit in my chair, get up and run head first into the wall. I don't know why I did that. I just did. Some people call it attention-seeking behavior. I don't know. I just get the urge to run into the wall with my head, and I would. More counseling. And pretty soon they tried to figure out what was wrong with Lil Wayne. My nickname was Lil Wayne, by the way. And I'll bet even in Connecticut, you've heard that my name was hijacked by somebody, Lil Wayne. That's, you know, it belongs to me. And my nickname, Lil Wayne. Lil Wayne was always in trouble with somebody. Not being a bully or a tough guy, just being weird. And God, I used to eat milk-bone dog biscuits. That was my first obsession. I know this is AA, so don't be offended. My first obsession was milk-bone dog biscuits. My dad had a dog. I ate one of his milk bones, and I liked it. And I became obsessed with it. That's all I could think about. And I couldn't, you know, my mom would hide them, try to keep me from eating them, and I'd find them. And pretty soon I couldn't find them anymore. So I went grocery shopping with my mom, and she'd lose track of me. She'd be over in milk and eggs, and the clerk found me in the dog food aisle sitting on the floor with a box of milk bones, eating them right out of the box. And the clerk, I think he was afraid I'd bite him. He didn't come near me. He just left me alone. And so my mom wouldn't take me shopping no more. I guess I embarrassed her. I don't know. And so I can't stop thinking about him. This time, a year goes by. I'm watching cartoons, and a commercial comes on for the family-sized milk bone. Those suckers were that big. At least that's how I saw them in my little eyes. And I wanted to have me a family-sized milk bone. And my mom, when I said, Mom, can I have one of those family-sized? I got smacked, so I wasn't going to bring that up for her again. But I know they love that dog more than they do me, so I know Mom is getting him them family-sized. So I'm a little detective, I guess. One Saturday, my brother and sister are out in the yard playing. I hide behind the couch because I know they're going to give that dog a treat. See, I know when I want something, I've got plenty of patience. I know that because I laid behind that couch waiting and waiting and waiting. Then all of a sudden, my dad's dog comes trotting across the living room floor, heading for the kitchen. I heard my mom rustling around in the kitchen, and a few seconds later, here comes that dog trotting across the living room floor with that family-sized milk bone dangling from his mouth. He don't know what hit him. I jumped off behind that couch, got on top of him, and put him in a chokehold, and I'm trying to shake him for everything to get that milk bone out of his mouth. He won't drop it. And so I thought, well, what the heck? So I bit him. I bit his ear, and he won't drop it. So I'm chewing on his ear. And he finally drops the milk bone, and for a split second, I think I'm winning. You know how we think, right? I thought I won. Well, what happened was I reached for the milk bone, and what he did was he bit me back. That's why he dropped the milk bone. And there's a scar right here and right here where he locked onto my face, and he shook me for everything I'm worth, and he absolutely shook the obsession for milk bones right out of my little body. From that day to this, I've not had one single milk bone. I don't need a milk bone sponsor, don't need no 12 steps, don't need to pray to God, none of that crap, right? Now, I know that sounds weird, but you got to understand how obsessed I was with those. But the obsession alone, if that's all it was with alcohol, I could have quit drinking just like I did quit eating milk bones. But you see, the obsession is only part of it. The other part is that physical allergy. And that alcohol, even more importantly, Silkworth says, I drink because I essentially like the effect produced. I didn't have these words until I met you guys and got into the work. But he was talking about this effect produced. I didn't understand that at first. Effect produced. What's the effect produced? In the 12 and 12, Bills refers to Bacchus. He said Bacchus boomeranged on us. Many of you probably know this. Bacchus is the mythological god of wine. They're talking about this effect produced by alcohol is godlike. What's that mean? It means that when I drink alcohol, I have what Wilson called an extemporaneous reaction. That's a big $5 word, so I had to look it up. Extemporaneous means to do or be with little or no prior preparation or practice, natural. And that's exactly what alcohol did for me. It made me feel the illusion of normalcy. When I'm drinking, I'm perfectly okay, it seems like. When I'm drinking Budweiser, I get along with people. You see, it seems to be a solution for me. Now, I didn't know that till I got to AA either. But when I'm drinking Budweiser, I get along with everybody. You know, I'm not the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde type alcoholic. I'm the Mr. Hyde, Dr. Jekyll. I'm a terror when I'm sober. I have this, you know, one of the definitions of agnosticism, of being agnostic, is menacing godlessness. And I can tell you that that's my description in between drinks. I can go weeks without a drink. I'm a periodic. But in between those weeks, that menacing godlessness takes over my life. And I'm that guy you don't want to be around sober. But when I'm drinking, you want to be around me. I'm actually a lot of fun when I'm drinking. But I just can't, I'm not that kind of guy that can drink for a long period of time. My body just would not take it. And I don't understand what's wrong with me. I know something's wrong with me mentally, emotionally. I'm starting to get diagnosed. I'm starting to get put in psychiatric hospitals. I've been in 17 psychiatric institutions. I was in one 14 times. It's called the East Moline State Insane Asylum. That's where I picked up the moniker Insane Wayne. I got put away in there for months at a time. I mean, it was built on rolling hills, and they would put me in a straitjacket for weeks at a time. And they would take me outside to walk me around the grounds in my straitjacket. And they'd have like what some people put on their kids' brace in the back now, that leash. They would have me on a leash, and I would try to escape. I would break away and run as fast as I could, and I would fall down the hill. And I would roll down the hill, and they would let me lay there and come get me later because I wasn't going anywhere. And you know, that's just the way it was back then. I needed a drink, and I didn't know what that was. And so if it was just the obsession, man, quitting drinking will fix that. And if it's just the allergy for alcohol, just don't drink. Don't pick up that first drink, Wayne. But I was powerless not to, and I didn't understand that either. I didn't understand powerless over alcohol. I didn't understand that. I was so baffled by that. You know, the first time I got drunk, I was 17 years old. I was diagnosed mentally retarded in eighth grade. When I went in ninth grade, I don't mean no disrespect. If you have a child with special needs, I am not mocking. But back in 1967 and 1968, you were called retarded. That's the way it was. They didn't fix that till 1968, 1969, where they advanced it to special education. So we got put in, quote, the retarded class. And I stayed there from ninth grade all the way through high school. Was never going to drink anything. I didn't know what alcohol was, but I was never going to drink brown whiskey because that's what my dad drank. My dad drank that brown whiskey, and he would beat my mom half to death on a regular basis. And if he couldn't find her, he would find us kids. That's just the way it was. And when my mom drank, she drank that tequila. I had no idea what that is. She drank that tequila, and she'd wait till my dad passed out, and she'd get even, but we appreciated that. So we cheered her on when she was pounding on the dad. And so I'm never doing that stuff. Never going to drink whatever that is. I drink Pepsi-Cola. Well, there's a guy looked after me in school. Every one of us I'm going to upgrade that class now. All of us in that class had what I would call a sponsor, someone who looked after you so the bullies couldn't get you because we were prime bait for bullies. I wasn't always 6'4", 270 pounds. I was bullyable. Not anymore, but I was. I was weak, frightened, and I didn't know what was wrong with me. Not alcoholic yet, but I'm knocking on the door. Go through high school just like that. Senior year, Tom, my bodyguard, my mentor, my sponsor, my everything, my protector, he took me to the senior dance. I'd never had a drink except Pepsi. And during the dance, I'm watching these boys and girls in the gymnasium dancing. Now, all I've ever done is lived in terror and fear inside my little body. Don't know what to do with it. I've had it since as far back as I can remember. The stuff that affected me as a child did not break my spirit. I believe I was born with a broken spirit, spiritual malady. But fast forward now, I've been affected by the behavior of others, the family life, the craziness at home, the gun fights, the knife fights, all the stuff my dad got into, my brother got into, terrorized me, terrified me. And I went from being a poet to violent. And I couldn't control my emotions. And Tom, he hands me my first beer, and he says, "Here, drink this, it'll make you feel better." And I didn't know I was a guzzler, but in NA and CA, they say things like pick up. That's addiction terminology, picking up. Came out of CA. But the term in AA 40 years ago was bottoms up. We would toast bottoms up. That's how they said it back then. And so I went bottoms up on that bottle of Budweiser, drank it all down, let out a big old belch, and told Tom it tastes terrible. Tom said, "That's okay, have another, you get used to it." And so I did. Somewhere between 4 and 5 Budweisers, little retarded Wayne grew up. Something happened between 4 and 5 Budweisers. Got so good looking I couldn't stand it. Looked down the dance floor, eyeballed me a blue-eyed blonde dancing with some loser. And all of a sudden my spirit, Dr. Jung talked about spiritus contra spiritum. The greatest spiritual experience and the greatest poison. the effect produced by the spirits. Spiritus contra spiritum. That happened to me somewhere between 4 and 5 Budweisers. I had an alteration in my personality, and where alcohol is supposed to sedate you, it did not sedate me. It elevated me. It excited me. It altered my perception of my reality. It is not supposed to do that, and 9 out of 10 drinkers, it does not do that. It only does that to the alcoholic. I didn't know that either till I came to AA. All I know is I spotted that blonde dancing on the floor with some loser, and I walked out there and didn't know what to say, but I asked her in my little weenie voice, can I cut in? And I didn't know she recognized me from the special class. Some of you girls understand this. She was giving me a sympathy dance is what she was doing. And so she danced with Lil Wayne from the retarded class. And then we danced 2 dances. And you know what? I didn't know this right away, but she started liking me. It wasn't because I was in that class anymore. She actually started liking me. And we were having a great time, and she didn't go back to the date. She stayed with me the rest of the night, and we found out sex meant 2 people out back that night. I had no idea about that. They weren't teaching us kids in the special class anything about procreation. I could promise you that. They did not want us ever procreating. Making a long story short, she ends up pregnant. I'm 17, she's 16. In Illinois, that's statutory rape unless you get married. So we got married. That was my first marriage. We got married. And then I don't have time to tell you that whole story, but my dad says, we got to get you out of town. Her dad's going to kill you. And I agreed with her dad that when the baby was born, I'd sign divorce papers. Joined the military. The Navy's the only one that would take me because of my transcripts. The Navy took me, and here I am 17 years old, and I find myself 3 weeks before I turn 18 in Vietnam. That didn't make me alcoholic, but it put a spin on my personalities. Came home from that, didn't drink. I didn't drink 1 drink while I was in Vietnam. I watched other people doing dope, and I saw them getting killed because they couldn't defend themselves. So I'm not going to do dope, and I'm not going to drink. It got worse, if you know what I mean. I come back from Vietnam. The divorce papers are waiting for me. The baby was born while I was in Vietnam. I never got 1 letter, never got 1 card, never got 1 phone call from anybody in my family or her family while I was in Vietnam. Her dad met me when I got back, handed me the divorce papers, said sign them. I signed them, went and drank for the 2nd time. I drank. I don't remember anything. I blacked out for 5 days apparently. And I come out of that. Have you ever come out of a blackout in a compromising position? Like wondering who you're with and where you are? So I'm in a blackout driving a car, and all of a sudden I notice there's a woman sitting next to me. And I promised God when I was Lil Wayne that I wouldn't violate his 10 commandments. Well, being in Vietnam, I've already violated some of his commandments. And then I look at her and I notice she's wearing a wedding ring, and I think, oh my God, I'm with somebody's wife. And she asked me what was wrong. She saw the expression, and I looked at her and she says, what's the matter, honey? And honey's not my name. It's never been my name. It's Wayne. And so I said, who are you? And she hit me in the shoulder, which I didn't like a whole lot. And I didn't know why she hit me. Well, I found out you ladies don't like to be asked who you are on your honeymoon. Apparently, we drove to Palmyra, Missouri, same place I got married the first time. I knew how to get there. And we got married. Now, I'm thinking it's okay, but I don't realize I'm a bigamist because we're not divorced yet. I just signed the papers. And they didn't have computers and all that stuff back there to check all this stuff. So now, not only am I married to her, but I'm still married to my first wife, even though the divorce is pending, the papers are signed. So I went back to Vietnam and felt safer. Got back and just don't want to bore you with details, but I came back in Vietnam the 2nd time. That did not break my spirit. It compounded the fracture of an already broken spirit. Why is that important? Because you see, I drank, unbeknownst to me, spiritus contra spiritum. I was drinking for the spirits to lift my spirits. I didn't know that. I learned that here in Alcoholics Anonymous. I know this doesn't apply to all alcoholics. Bill said half, and I believe I'm part of that half he was referring to. And I just didn't understand none of this stuff. And I started having tears. I've got 2 kids now, and I'm having these tears at night, and just I can't stop them. And I wake up one day, and I'm afraid I'm going to hurt my 2 little girls. I just can't even take that thought, and I moved out. 6 months later, I'm sleeping in a dumpster behind Larry's Oasis. 6 months later, I've got my medals. It's the only thing I had in my dumpster. The only thing I cared about anymore was I had those medals I was awarded for my service in Vietnam. And I don't know what's wrong with me, folks. I have no clue. I just want a beer. And and I go weeks without a drink, and the terror builds up and up and up. I don't know what it is about me that I don't want to go drink. It's just I guess that's the way it is with a periodic. But I would eventually give in, and once I take that drink, I will drink until something stops me, and it doesn't usually take but a couple of days. And I'll get into some kind of jackpot. I'll end up in a psychiatric hospital because what I did undrunk will catch up to me. It was just the way it was for me throughout that 5-year stretch that I lived in that dumpster. How I got to AA, I wasn't coming to AA. I'm not an alcoholic. All I drink is beer and fine wine like Ripple, Boone's Farm, Strawberry Hill. That's my favorite because when I puke, it looks like I'm bleeding internally. And I lie and say I got cancer. Somebody gives me a free drink. I like that. I have no idea what's going on with me. Have no clue. And I'm a victim of circumstances in my mind. I'm a victim of my family. I'm a victim of Vietnam. I can't get out of this victim mentality. And I've learned in my time in AA that victims don't get to stay sober because we're so busy living in the past and afraid of the future, we got no today. And that's why I've done the work I continue to do, is because I can't afford to be anybody's victim at any time. I can't afford it. Self-pity, I don't allow it in my life. You know, I got diagnosed depressed for 20 years. And I come to find out that they misdiagnosed me all those times. I was totally misdiagnosed and mismedicated because they were medicating me for a clinical condition when I was suffering from, I've come to learn, was a spiritual condition. I had a broken spirit. And what looks like clinical depression in some cases, it is. But in my case, it was just days and weeks and months of absolute self-centeredness and self-pity. Bill said 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. And I was so emboweled in self-pity that it looked like depression. But if you treat it like depression, I wasn't going to get better because that's not what it was. It was just all I think about is myself day in, day out, day in, day out. And eventually I pick up a drink. And then I drink till I'm done. And then I'll go 3 or 4 weeks without a drink again. So I'm in that dumpster. It's Halloween night, 1972. About 1 a.m., a little after midnight, I hear a knock on my dumpster lid. And I was home, alone. Some of you women are picky. By the way, I got a bone to pick with some of you ladies, by the way. I've heard many of your stories now in 42 years. I have heard many of you say, I was a fallen woman. Well, I want you to know something. None of you fell into my dumpster. I just want you to hear that loud and clear. It was lonely in that tin shed, I have to tell you. And somebody's knocking on my dumpster lid. I wondered who was out there. I was curious, so I lifted that lid up just far enough to look out, and there was the most evil man I ever knew in my life that I swore if I had the chance, I would put him in the ground. It was my dad. But my dad had a different look in his eye. Every time I looked, I couldn't look in his eyes. There was so much terror in there. But when I looked through the dumpster and saw him, he didn't look the same. His eyes were different. They weren't that devil. They weren't that evil look that he used to live with. Something happened to him. I didn't know that then, but I knew something was different. And I lifted that lid up the rest of the way. You see, the last time I saw my father was outside the Rock Island County Courthouse. He had gotten a restraining order against me. I'm not going to tell you why. This is not the appropriate forum, but I'll tell you in a general way. He took me to court and got a restraining order against me, and the judge awarded him the restraining order. And here's how it read in part. Wayne Everett Butler will not go within 1,000 yards of his mother, Ada Ellen Raw Butler. He will not go within 1,000 yards of his ex-wife, he named her. He will not go within 1,000 yards of his wife, he named her. And he will not go within 1,000 yards of his children. And he named them. And when he started reading off my kids' name, that vile thing rolled up in me. You can't tell me I can't see my kids. And so I left that courtroom. My dad went out the back door of the courthouse. I went out the front. And I'm standing out on the sidewalk thinking how I'm going to go get my kids. You can't tell me I can't have my kids. I'm going to go take my kids from their mother, and we're going somewhere. That was my mind. My mind was made up. You can't tell me that. My dad comes walking around from behind the courthouse. I didn't know why. He went out to his car to get something, is what he did. And he comes walking up on me, and he pulled that pistol out of the belt of his back of his pants, and he put that pistol right to my head, pulled that hammer back, and he says to me, you and I both know that order ain't worth the paper it's written on. You know this. If you violate that order, I help bring you in the world. I will be the one that puts you in the ground. And my dad would do that, and he meant that. And I moved out shortly thereafter, afraid I was going to wake up and scare my kids. And that's the last time I saw my dad. So there he is now outside my dumpster. And there's a part of me hoping he's there to put me out of my misery. There's a part of me that's hoping he can do what I can't do. I ain't got the guts or whatever it takes to kill yourself. But I thought maybe my dad would. And instead he says to me, Wayne, I said, what? He says, would you like to come home with me tonight? I didn't know he was paying a 12-step call on me. I didn't know he'd gone and joined this cult called AA, because that's what it was known as back then, a cult. I didn't know he'd gone off and joined them. And what he was doing was paying a 12-step call on me. But when he said, do you want to come home with me? I looked around my little room and I said, no, thanks, Dad, I'm doing fine. See, I have no clue what's going on here. My dad apparently was forewarned by some elders of the group that if I resist, leave. And that's exactly what he did. He said, okay, and he walked away. Make a long story short, I jumped out of that dumpster and began that walk of walks that every man and woman in this meeting has made. Now, maybe your bottom didn't start at the dumpster like mine did. Maybe it started in that Cadillac you parked on the front porch. Or maybe it's that closet you passed out in, naked, and your little babies found you in the morning, wanting you to get them ready for school. You know that despair, that groveling despair that we feel when our family sees us at our worst, or someone sees. My bottom started out at that dumpster. I make that walk and I get up to this restaurant called Harvey's Restaurant. It's an old mom and pop truck driver coffee shop, 10 cents for the cup of coffee. And I looked in there and there's usually truck drivers in there. Nobody's in there except this 800-year-old waitress slowly wiping down the coffee bar. I sized her up and knew I could work her because I'm a bum. You know, these days they call you homeless. Homeless is I love it. Homeless. Back then, you're a bum. And they would say, you're a bum. I'm a bum. Okay, I'm a bum. Got $5? You know, I walk in that restaurant. My odor hits up to her before I do. I sit down on this wobbly malt shop type stool. And she does something I wasn't expecting. She dropped that rag on the counter, cocks her head at me, and shoots me a smile. And then she yells out, what can I do for you, sweetie, as she brings me a glass of water and a cup of coffee. She kind of got me off my game for a minute. But I caught myself up because I'm hungry and I want a cigarette. So I went into my routine, a routine I did not want to even tell my sponsor in my fifth step for fear he'd judge me, but I was willing to tell this waitress for a free sandwich, cup of coffee, sandwich, maybe a Pell Mell tailor-made cigarette. So as soon as she lent me her ear, I began to tell her. I told her about that alcoholic home I was raised in. I told her about the terror of my father, the beatings I took. I told her about being bullied in school. I told her about the retarded class. I told her about Vietnam, alligator tears. I told her about when I was 9 years old and a neighborhood guy that we didn't have a name for. Now we know what it is. He's called a pedophile. Back then, all homes were heated with coal. So most homes in the Midwest had coal bins in the basement. And he took me off the street on a Friday, and he locked me in his coal bin and tortured my little body for 3 days. I told her about that. Alligator tears were rolling down her face. So I move in for the burger, tell her about Vietnam. I misidentified what she was crying about. You see, I thought she was crying about my story, but I found out later she wasn't. She wasn't crying about my story. She'd heard my story hundreds of times. She was in a program called Al-Anon. I don't even know what an Al-Anon is, for crying out loud. She's in a program called Al-Anon. And her husband, Harvey, they own the restaurant. She learned in Al-Anon that if Harvey's having trouble, the only hope for him is the newcomer. And Harvey was having a hard time staying sober, and so she knew he needed the newcomer to work with, and unbeknownst to me, she decided it's me. And I thought I'm working her and I'm winning when she's actually working me. And a couple days later, Harvey comes in. Harvey's this little guy he didn't come up to my chest hardly, just a little old ugly. He was so ugly, he made me feel good about myself. I looked at his nose, and he had this nose that had like these golf balls, these dimple protrusions from his nasal passage. And I swear to God, when his heart beat, his nose went like this. And he had red and black and blue veins running through his face. I didn't know what that was. I now know what it is. It's called late stage, almost always fatal, spider angioma. That's what that's called. And instead, Harvey shakes my hand. He says, I heard you need some help. And I'm thinking, well, it's about time. and he put a coin in my hand. He's giving me the bum's handshake. You all know what the bum's handshake is, don't you? When they put something in your hand. Money. I like paper. This was a coin. I knew by the size that you couldn't spend it. And when he got done shaking my hand, I looked at the coin, and the side I was looking at had these two A's. I had no idea what those two A's meant. And he said, you know how glib them old timers can be? He says, turn it over, you know, like whatever. So I flipped it over, and it had the Serenity Prayer. That didn't mean nothing to me. I wanted something to eat. I want some money. It didn't say, God grant me Pall Mall cigarettes. It just said, God grant. Who wants serenity at a time like this? I need something to eat. And he says, you take this coin tomorrow down to 410 16th Street Bowling about noontime. There's going to be some friends of mine there. You tell them Harvey sent you. You show them that coin. And I'll be along later in the day to see how you're doing. He didn't tell me I was going to AA. He did what you call spiritual trickery is what he did. And he told me when I got there, there'd be a light bulb hanging on a cord in the basement. He said, if that light's on in the cellarway, if that light's on, go in, they're there. Now, remember that part I told you about being neurotic? You know, to tell a neurotic newcomer, potential newcomer, that if the light's on, go in. You know, I know about cults. Here we go. And so I got there the next day about noontime, and the only reason I went, because I thought I might get something to eat and a cigarette. I get there about noontime. I looked for the light bulb. It's in the cellarway. He said, if it's on, go in, but it was flickering. It wouldn't stay on. It was flickering on and off, on and off. And I kept waiting for it to stop flickering so I could go in, because I'm a bit neurotic and anal retentive, you must know. And so I'm out there doing this, trying to will that light to stop blinking, because he didn't tell me what to do if it was blinking. So it's got to stop. It won't stop. I'm losing my mind because it won't stop. I'm trying to control it with my mind. It won't stop blinking. And I said, the hell with it. And I went to Larry's Oasis and moosed me up some Budweisers, got oiled up. I had just enough booze in me now. It's getting near 8 o'clock. And now I want what I got coming. They owe me. I've been thinking about this all afternoon. I've been drinking at it all afternoon. I want to know who those people are. I've got that coin burning a hole in my pocket. I want whatever they owe me. I went flying back there. This is Friday night. By the way, I like to say, is it odd or is it God? Because sometimes God shows up in odd ways. This is Friday night. If this would have been any other day, you see this group, the Moline group, I come to find out, they only had 3 meetings a week. 2 on Friday, 1 on Saturday at noon. Had this been any other day, there wouldn't have been a soul there when I went back. But I got back there about 8 o'clock. Don't care about the light bulb. I got just enough booze in me now. I don't care about the light bulb. I'm going in because they owe me. I went running. Basically, I wasn't running, but I was on the quick step going through that basement doorway. Failed to notice the door header's 5'10"ish. I'm 6'3"ish. And I caught that door header at the eyebrow. And the impact lifted me off of my feet just like this. I hit the deck just like that. And I slid into my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And inside that room was a round table with 6 or 7 old fools that must have been talking about death and dying because they were old. And I slid right between 2 of them. And this old crusty buzzard got up at his chair, stood over me, and he goes just like this. Gives me the safe sign. And then he growls at me. And he said, slide right in here, you big dummy. We got a wrench to fit every nut that comes in the door. And by the looks of you, it's going to have to be an adjustable wrench. Now, I don't like him. And then he says, my name's Barney. I didn't ask him, and I don't care. And he says, my name's Barney. And then he says, I'm an alcoholic. And I thought, you poor S.O.B., you're an alcoholic. Oh, my God. Now, I've been in enough therapy to know when that guy or gal sitting across the desk leans over to you and self-discloses something to you, I know what they're doing. They're trying to prime the pump. They're trying to get me to self-disclose something back. So I knew I had to give him something back. And I said, well, I'm ADD. And he says, I'll bet you are. I said, you know what else I am? He said, what's that? I said, I'm OCD. He says, I'll bet you are. He said, you know what else I think you might be? I said, what's that? He says, I think you might be ODD. And I've never heard of that diagnosis. In the DSM-3, there's no diagnosis of ODD. So I said, what's that? He says, you are very odd. And then he says, I'm going to be your sponsor. That's where it started. And for 5 years and 5 days, I went to meetings. What meetings I went to, I usually had a drink before the meeting, and I usually had a drink after. Didn't always get drunk. Not always. Did that for 5 years and 5 days. Nothing was different on November 7th of 1977, 5 years and 4 days later. Barney said, will you meet me at the noon meeting, help me set up for it. I don't know what it was about this guy, Barney, but I wanted to be around him all the time. I'm not an alcoholic, but I really like this guy. I don't know what it is about him. And he didn't ever confront me, challenge me, get tired of me, it seems. He just said, keep coming back, kid. And I kept coming back. Something about him, I just wanted to be around him. And on November 7th, he says, why don't you meet me tomorrow at the noon meeting and help me set up for the meeting? And I said, I will. He says, can you go tonight without a drink? And I said, no, I can't go the rest of my life without a drink. And he said, no. Can you just go tonight without a drink? I said, Barney, you know I can't go the rest of my life without a drink. And he says, oh my God, can you make it till midnight tonight without a drink? I said, well, anybody can do that. I mean, you're an alcoholic and you can't do that, you know. I made it till 7 a.m. and on my way to the noon meeting, I stole a 6-pack of warm Budweiser. I get to the noon meeting, I'm sitting on the front steps drinking warm Budweiser. I've got 3 cans of Budweiser drank when Barney shows up early for the meeting. He doesn't even look at it. There's 3 empty cans on the ground, 3 in my lap, and I have every intention of drinking them. Barney doesn't even look at the beer. Instead, he looks at me and he says, why don't you come in and help me set up for the meeting? And then he went inside. I cannot tell you why I did this. Is it odd or is it God? Who's to say? But I hid those other 3 cans of Budweiser in the bush, and I went in and helped Barney set up for the meeting. I don't know where those cans of beer are, but I know where I am right now. I'm in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous 42 years and 8 months later. It's an amazing thing. I just kept coming, kept suiting up, showing up, so to speak. And that started my journey. Had no idea about powerlessness, had no idea why I was powerless. I've come to understand why I'm powerless over alcohol. Some people don't need to know why. I needed to know why, because until then, my mind wasn't going to be satisfied. And my sponsor was kind enough and patient enough to help me understand why. He didn't tell me you don't need to know why. Shut up, do what you're told. He tried to answer my why questions. He was very patient with me. I could only wish to be as patient as him someday. But what happened was I stayed, I got sober that night. Haven't had a drink from that day to this. Another new guy came in that very same day. I was 27 years old. He was 25 years old. And we buddied up. I told him I was his sponsor. I had like 3 hours more sobriety than him. So I told him I didn't even know what a sponsor was, really. And but Barney just said, you two go through the big book, you'll be fine. And we did. And, Jimmy was his name. Jimmy is still sober to this very day. He and I both celebrated 42 years last November 8th. And that's a powerful thing to know because we got involved today, we got busy. But I didn't know what was wrong with me. People were drinking. People were slipping all around us in town. A lot of people weren't staying sober. I was afraid it was going to happen to me. And Barney just said, just stay along, keep doing this. And for 7 years, I stayed sober. I had white knuckle sobriety. I was doing everything I could possibly do in AA, but I couldn't outrun this one nagging thought. What's wrong with me? And it's very fascinating. Mandela says, speak to a man in a language he understands, you get into his head. And the Navy got into my head. They said, if you don't quit drinking, we're going to send you home. I believed them, and they sent me home. Psychiatrist said, don't drink on this medication or here's what's going to happen. I believed him. I drank anyway. Got into my head, I drank anyway. Preacher man said, if I keep drinking like this and behaving like this, I'm going to go to hell. I believed him. I drank anyway. Nothing that the human powers of psychiatry, psychology, sociology, pharmacology, and religion, nothing they said to me, those human powers, could not get past my neck. Mandela spoke to that. And then he says, speak to a man in his language, and you get into his heart. And that's what happened to me when I wasn't looking. I'm 16 days sober. It's Thanksgiving 1977. My dad's sober 9 years now. I don't know that. I've heard of it. He invited me out for Thanksgiving dinner. Just to fast forward, I've never had a relationship with my father. Never. He was the most brutal human being I've ever met. And I was scared of him. And so I was scared to go out there for Thanksgiving dinner. But I went anyway because my sponsor told me to go. My dad comes out in the kitchen after I greeted my mom. And my dad says, come on in, let's watch a football game. I melted. Do you know I've wanted to hear a kind word from my father for 27 years? And that was the first kind word he gave me. I was in heaven. Here I am, 16 days sober. He's 9 years sober. We are now going to have a relationship that I would hope we would have. Halftime of the football game, a commercial comes on for a new kind of beer, Miller Lite. Miller Lite. I remember the jingle, tastes great, less filling. My dad says to me, surely that beer can't hurt me and you. 9 years, 16 days. How many of you have any idea how bad I wanted to have a beer with my pops? I wanted to have a beer with him so bad. I don't know nothing about powerlessness. I'm only sober 16 days. I don't understand this stuff yet. Just got a bare beginning. And I said, surely not. I'm going to have a beer with my dad. So we went to the liquor store and bought a 12-pack of Miller Lite and brought it home. My mom slumped down in the kitchen and just started crying. My dad opened up a Miller Lite and he drank that entire can down, let out a belch, and opened up another one. I started to open up mine, and my sponsor's voice went off in my head. Dummy, see, I had a sponsor. My dad didn't have a sponsor. I had a sponsor, and I gave my sponsor my word. This time I would call him before I drank because I always call him after I drank. I gave him my word. And I said to my dad, do you mind if I call my sponsor? I told him I would before I drank. I can't tell you what I would have done if he would have said, no, let's drink. I don't know what I would have done. But he said, go ahead. And he drank that second beer down, opened up his third. And why do I know that? Because I'm counting. 6 of them are mine. I call my sponsor. By the way, that was back in the day. Some of you older folks remember there was no voicemail. There was no answering machines. And as a matter of fact, if you called a phone number, it would ring until somebody answered or till you disconnected. It would ring for a week. I called him up. He answered the phone. I said, Barney, he said, what do you want, dummy? I said, well, I'm here with my dad. He's having a beer, and I want to have one with him. Is that okay? I wanted his permission. Is that okay? And don't you agree that's a simple yes or no question? What he says was, I'll be right over, and then he hung up, and I don't know what that meant. So I called him back to see if I could have a beer while I was waiting for him, and he wouldn't answer the phone. Then he shows up in my dad's house. I don't even know he knows where my dad lives. He shows up at my dad's house. He walks in the living room, sees my dad is on, he's got 3 empty cans of beer, drinking his 4th one. He looks at me and he says, you can tell I hadn't had one yet. And he says, come on, let's go for a ride. 16 days sober. We go for the most important ride of my life. We drove around for an hour. He told me his story. He didn't talk about me at all. He told me his story. He told me about how when his wife died, it broke his heart. Back then, there was only 3 channels on television. 2 went off at midnight, 1 went off at 1 a.m. And he talked about he would sit in front of the TV till 3 in the morning, drinking Kessler's whiskey and watching that movie, A Polar Bear in a Snowstorm, because there wasn't nothing on the screen except fuzz. And he talks about his life and how AA turned him around and how much he loved AA. And then he says to me, I even love you, dummy. And I'm thinking, yeah, I know they tell you that in sponsor school. You want to soften us up for the sell job. But I liked it. And then he says, you know what? If you don't drink tonight, I'm going to pick you up in the morning. Now, he could have said, aren't those the same clothes you've had on since you came in 16 days ago? He could have said that. He could have said, don't you change your clothes? You stink. Can't you take a bath? He could have said all those things. But instead, he says, do you mind if I buy you a new set of clothes? Now I'm going to take you to a convention. And by God, he showed up that next morning. My dad, he went out and got a 5th of whiskey. And he was off and running. He died a year and a half later from untreated alcoholism. My sponsor showed up the next morning. I got to tell you something. I have told a lot of newcomers in 42 years, I will meet you tomorrow at a certain time. I have always showed up no matter what. And the vast majority of them don't. But that's not my business. I showed up because Barney showed up. He picked me up, took me to buy a new set of clothes at the Salvation Army. I got about 5 minutes left here. Took me to Salvation Army, bought me this hideous lime green double knit polyester leisure suit, and then the only shoes they had that would fit me were these 13.5-inch gunboat black and brown box to Oxford platform shoes. And I went in 6'3", came out 6'8". Man, I was a vision for you. Took me home, allowed me to take a bath in his tub before I put the new clothes on. He didn't tell me I needed. He didn't tell me I stink. He said, you know what? Wouldn't it be a good idea to take a bath before you put those new clothes on? And I did. And he took me to that convention, stood me at the front door, and made me a greeter. And the Mandela effect took place again. You see, he was speaking my language when he drove me around for an hour. And then he took me to that convention where 6 members of AA gave up their Thanksgiving weekend to carry the message to a knucklehead like me. guy named Chuck C., Norm Alpy, Clancy I., Johnny H., Dottie Shore, and Tom Brady Jr., Charlotte, North Carolina. And all 6 of them, including Dottie Shore, a woman. I never thought I'd ever identify with a woman. They told their stories in a general way. Some of them were funny, some of them were serious, but I related to all 6. What happened to me was they went right past my neck and they went right to my heart with language of the heart. And I left that convention on a different basis than when I went. I don't have time to tell you all that, but I hope you can tell I've taken the 12 steps. I've had crises in my life, as do all of us if we stay sober a long period of time. You know, my sponsor died. He was my sponsor 29 years, 5 months, and 14 days. And it just broke me when I got the news he died. And Tommy was mentoring me for quite a while. And Tom I was my sponsor for a little while. And then he lost his mind from dementia and a tumor. And now Tommy's been my sponsor for several years now. And I've always had effective, solid sponsorship, thank God. And during this time, I've got just a few minutes left. I just want to share, you know, at 5 years sober, my wife ran off with my sponsee. That kind of offended my sensibilities a little bit that they took off together. And I was complaining to my sponsor about it. And he says, well, you asked him why he wanted you to sponsor him. And he says, he wants what you have. Apparently he was serious about that. And he wanted what you had and he took her. And that kind of left me with a sour taste in my mouth. And 7 years sober, I've got people in AA that are playing doctor on me. They're telling me to go back and get on medication again. And I just knew it wasn't psychiatric. I don't know why, but I've been sober for 7 years. So I just knew it wasn't that. And then I discovered some information about the spiritual malady that I never uncovered before. And it's in a book called The 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. Bill hit it in those essays. And where I come from, people literally tell you everything you need to know is in the big book. You don't need the 12 and 12. And because I'm a newcomer, I listen to that kind of stuff. It almost killed me. And I found that information. I found out that I suffer from it. Since I took my last drink, what I've been suffering from is a spiritual malady, a malaise, a disturbed condition, that I have a broken spirit. And Chuck C. was right when he said his only problem is conscious separation from God. And so what I found that, is that possible? Can that be true? And as I've stayed sober one day at a time and began to pursue this idea Bill talked about of emotional sobriety and began to do the work that he did with Father Dowling in the 12 steps and began to embrace that, my life, you know, I'm no longer, I have no mental illness. I have no psychiatric issues. They've all fallen away. Here I was convinced I was psychiatric. And what I was a broken spirit trying to find my way and confused. And alcohol had some strange ability to raise my spirits. And I know that if I don't take these 12 steps on a continuous basis, if I don't continue to give myself completely to the AA way of life, that I'm in jeopardy of taking a drink. I'm in jeopardy of that drift. You know, anything's possible in AA except the presidency. I'll never be president. Not that I'd want to be, but I know that's not possible. So I'm not glib when I say anything is possible if you make your mind up to it, within reason. And you know what? I always wanted to be a cop. Now, when you've been arrested 9 times, 7 of them without a drink in your body while going to AA, you're not considered alcoholic. You're considered a criminal. And so I've got 9 arrests, 7 without a drink in my body, going to meetings, 17 psychiatric institutions. I want to be a cop. So at 9.5 years sober, after I've retaken the steps, and at 7 years sober, the way Bill Wilson took the steps with Father Ed Dowling, when I found that history and I retook the steps along that lines, my mind began to clear up almost right away, but I was the last one to know. 9.5 years sober, I applied for the sheriff's department. You can only imagine the hoops I had to jump through with my past. At 10 years sober, I go into the sheriff's academy. 24 weeks later, I come out of the sheriff's academy, and I'm standing there in a gymnasium with 15 other academy folks. My sponsor and his girlfriend and half of my home group is out in the audience, and I'm the last one to have my badge pinned on me. And I got my hand on the bigger book, taking the oath, and as the sheriff is pinning my badge on, I look out the corner of my sponsor's crying like a baby. So I thought that was cool until I thought I was crying because they gave me a gun, a real gun. That made me scared. I became a cop. I did that for 5 years. Then I became a bodyguard. I got an offer to come to California and work as a bodyguard. I took the job. And then I got involved in doing a workshop, and I've been doing that workshop for 30 years now. I do it for fun and for free. I'm not paid to do it. I do this workshop for emotional sobriety to give back what I've been given. And my life, I can't even begin to tell you how my life has opened up to the world and how free I am. You know, to close it up, there's a question. How free do you want to be? And I want to be free. You know, I've been rewarded with the 2 goals of AA because of my efforts. Victory over alcohol and freedom from the bondage of self. I'm a free man today. That sounds silly to outside people. Well, of course you are, Wayne. Of course you're a free man. They don't understand what I mean. I've got a family of sponsors, grand sponsees, great grand sponsees. I've got a great sponsorship family. My sponsors got a sponsorship family. It's a tight connection that I have. And I need that connection because when I'm feeling disconnected, that malaise begins to come over me again. And I begin to drift into that zone called the spiritual malady. And I'm so glad we have steps 10, 11, and 12 as maintenance and growth steps. And I try to administer them to myself as often and as much as I can. I'll just leave you with this. Mandela said, speak to a man in his language, and you get into his heart. And you guys have gotten into my heart in a way that no human powers, you know, when Bill wrote part B of how it works, and I'll close with this, he said that probably no human power could relieve me of my alcoholism. You know, the word probably gets dropped off almost all the time, but that word's very important, that probably no human power could relieve me of my alcoholism. And it's true. The human powers of medicine, psychiatry, psychology, pharmacology, sociology, and religion, those human powers, though they can treat many things, could not relieve me of my alcoholism. But God could and would if he were sought. And AA's method of seeking is one with another. Wherever 2 or more are gathered, there he is in the midst. So when I sit down and talk to another alcoholic, share in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, I know that I'm in the womb of the higher power. Thank you for letting me share.